Eric Burgess here with Music Marketing TV. Today we're going to be taking this choir sound and making it trancey. Tossing it in a track sounds like this. So all those little glitchy kind of sounds, those are all coming from Super Modal. It's all part of the choir. So it's all baked into this. This is the linchpin that makes this sort of work. You can feed a lot of things into this. Some stuff might be better than others. For example, you could send in a saw wave, has lots of harmonics, so lots of cool filter shenanigans could go down. Choir tends to follow the same thing. Voices have a lot of stuff going on in them. So they tend to work out well. Pads, atmospheres, those kinds of things are what we're going to be feeding this. Now let me show you a couple key techniques, and then we'll make something from scratch that will do a similar thing. So the first sort of biggest technique is if you're going to do something way over the top with glitches and all these things, you need some way to manage the length of each individual bit. You need an envelope. And so in this case, I'm using a sequencer that is driving the volume control, and I am using the stereo ability. You can have the left and the right be their own things according to how you make your sequence. So this is responsible for driving that sequence. If we play this with it on, we get rid of this. That's what it sounds like all the time. So there's a lot of heavy-handed stuff going on here, which this can be cool. We could automate this off, but in general, you're going to want something to give a distinct shape. It just makes it so it's not all over everything. It gives room for other interesting things to happen. So that's the first thing, but I do have it, the volume sort of pushed up. You can do a similar thing by just using the dry wet. But the volume makes more sense because I don't want the choir coming through just on its own. But there are cases where a dry wet might do what you want more than the volume will. Depends on what you're doing. Next, we've got here our crazy driver that's driving the decay. And if we take a look, I am automating quite a few things. So we'll be talking about sequences here, but I am automating the decay, the frequency, and the shape to change over time. This shape control, as we move it, let me put this over here on the side. So as I scroll through, we'll go through it. See what's happening to this sequencer. It gets a lot sharper. This is super duper duper handy for creating interesting sequences. Let's actually make something now so you can sort of see some of the decisions that went into doing a part like this. So the first thing you're going to need is a part. I actually constructed the part with just the note C. I just had a low C. It was like down here, and it just repeated a bunch. And I made that kind of interesting. Later, I decided to add chords. So just so you know, a lot of this came with me just working on a C. We're going to work with chords because I think the chords, if I had known this from the start, I probably would have started with this. So I'm going to copy this, and we're going to send this to its own channel so that it is completely separate. I'm going to paste it in. So on this pad 2, it's now completely isolated. We're going to go over to Super Modal, and we need to set this back to its default state. So I'm going to come in here, go to init, and it all kind of calms down, stops moving around and stuff. And let's make sure that it is off. So if I solo it, nothing moves. Perfect. So all the automation is also like completely separate now as well. So, all right, so this is our default state. And by the way, if you're looking for this, it's in the subtle. So if you've been going through your presets, if you go to subtle, it's the first one. Something that is good to know. So it is not a very overwhelming plugin. It's just a filter, but it's a really cool filter. So the reason it's so cool is because we come in here, we've got a low pass. We're going to stick basically to a low pass. There is a band pass and a high pass. We're going to stay with low pass. What makes it so cool is this modal section. So this modal section is kind of like crazy amounts of resonance. They're like I view them as like really specific comb filters. So this comb filter will make it sound like a saw wave. And these are like categories on the bottom, they call them models. And then these are the transform options. I call them variations. So the model we've picked, the category, this is waveforms, and these are other types of waveforms. That's how I kind of view it. But they have this transform and model terminology. So this is piano. The category is instruments. As you go up and down, you get other instruments. And at the top, you could see the resonances they're going to introduce into the sound to make it sound like a piano's in there. So if I play the choir, and the decay is sort of how long these resonances are allowed to hang around. So with a low decay, it's not very obvious. But as I drive the decay up, and we then try a different instrument, vibraphone, a bell. Let's go to another category, hyper square, square, saw. Maybe make it a bit lower. This will shift all the resonances down. Here's a vibraphone. Let's go for another one. This is an oscillator, a voice option, noise. So it can get kind of magical. So these high decay values are pretty useful to us. There's a few things here like damping will get rid of the high end. Partials is a fancy way of getting rid of low and high. So you can get sort of this, it's really nice for cleaning up sound because sometimes you don't want the low end, especially when you have your frequency set really low. So anyways, that's the gist of it. We have another video where we cover it in detail. You can go check that one out. What we want to do is we want to make some cool stuff for it. So there's a couple key moves. The first one I recommend you start with before you even mess with the filter and the model is to just get a control going that modulates the volume. That way you have a rhythm to work with. I'm going to put it on the third one. The third one, I don't know why. The first two I like to use for one here and like one here. And this is closer to over here. Maybe the fourth one. Let's put it on the fourth one. So we'll grab the sequencer. So this is the sequencer. It's got a couple of handy doodads in it. The first one is if you hold shift, you can snap it to these like regions. Really handy if you want to really quick just zero stuff or just get a general level. If you hold alt, you can snap to the piano. And there's ways to do pitch specific things. I'm not going to worry about that here. I'm not trying to make a melody with this, but if you hold alt while over it, you can do that. There's a re-trigger function I should also just mention that allows you to re-trigger this, meaning you can make it start over on command. I'm also not going to be using that, but it's something that is handy to know that just exists. The things we're going to be messing with are the rate, which is how fast this can move, the shape, which is how spiky, and there's these other shapes. So when you get to C, you get these square waves, then you get to these saw waves, and then you get to these exponential waves. And then after that, it's just sort of like how curvy the lines are. Like, right, when we go to B, we're basically at triangles. We have a linear interpolation. And when we go to A, it's smoothie. Smoothie? It's like a sine wave. And then we have patterns. Patterns are kind of like presets, but they keep your rate going on. By the way, this little thing takes it off, the little metronome, so that you can do like any old frequency. This will make it sync to your DAW. And these are all automatable. That is super powerful. You can do cool stuff with that. So patterns, kind of like presets. Sometimes they're fun starting points. You can then modify them from there. So don't be afraid to just try out the different patterns. There's also unipolar, which allows you to only do stuff in a single direction. Otherwise, they'll go up and down, which cannot be desirable sometimes. So let's take this and connect it to the volume control. So here's the volume control. We want this to move automatically. We want to make a cool rhythm. First, let's calm it down. Go to a rate of 1. That's a good starting point. To modulate something, if you're anything like me, I'm always looking for something to click and drag because every plugin seems to be doing that. Polyverse takes a bit different of an approach. You just have these 3 lines. Wherever these lines are, that is a thing that can be modulated. So we'll click this, and you can see it showing up here. If anything's on, they'll pop up. So these are now on, and now they're there. So you have 4 of these to mess with. So we're going to go here. We're going to say, okay, that's nice. We want this to modulate, so we got to give it a depth. But we don't want it to go up and down, at least not in this case. I just want it, if it's at the bottom, it should be off. If it's high, it should be volume. That's how I want it to be. So I'm going to make this unipolar. So what unipolar does is now if we look, it only goes up. And we want this completely 100% controlled. So I'll have this at 0. Now this is essentially a loop for how this is going to behave. It's a sequence. So let's make an interesting shape. And something we can kind of do just to generate something is just pick a random pattern and then give the shape down to D or all the way down to D. So you can pick between these. This could sometimes generate some cool stuff. Let's hear it for the moment. Let's hear this, how this goes. We will want to leave unipolar for a specific reason we'll see here in a second. But let's just hear this. So right, we might come in, and this is why I had mine up a bit. Tried another pattern. This one's kind of cool. We'll maximize these a bit and give it a shape. Kind of neat. Maybe boost it a bit. Now, if you click, there's this option for stereo. But you notice it's only coming out the left. This is because we are unipolar. So if we make this go up and down, now it'll interpret this as the left. So now we can hear both going through. So that's the specific reason why. So I kind of like this. It's kind of cool. It's a nice speed. Maybe we want it to be a little more intense. We could just add a few more. Oops, did not mean to change the type. Okay, so we have the first bit sort of under wraps. We have an interesting volume shape. Now, let's go ahead and jump to the next bit. We can always just boost it by simply raising the level here. Let's go after the filters now. So filters, pretty interesting stuff. Let's add another sequence. Actually, you know what? I have found that I typically... Here's how I like to assign the jobs, right? Because we're going to have some wild movement. And not everything I find I want to attach to a sequence when I'm writing music. When I'm writing a preset for this, it's a bit different. You want to stay inside, so it's all baked into the preset. But there are some things you're going to want to change throughout your song that you're better off automating. One of those I find I typically like to automate the decay. Tends to just work out better for me. The filter, this can be responsible for these crazy movements that you hear, like these like lasers and things. So if you want lasers, you're going to want a high decay, some pretty high resonance usually, and you're going to want that frequency doing work. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to grab a sequence. We're going to just pick some random pattern as just a starting point. Let's see here. I don't know, that one's fine. And we will give it a strong shape. So now we have just this sort of interesting starting point. And we will move this around. Now, I like to keep my volume just because it's kind of tempting to sometimes mix this one in. I like to keep this separate because I find I change this a lot. And mixing it into other processes can like just make the sound different, something you don't want. So I like to keep my sequence for my volume just totally isolated. So I just dedicate it there. There also is a plugin available called Gatekeeper, also by Polyverse, which is an even better version of this. It's like this, but like the big brother that can do all the things. But just as a word of warning, I've fallen in this trap several times. And I find that I almost always regret it. So don't touch it. You can, it's up to you. So if you give it some modulation depth, sounds like this. Something like that is fine. For this, I think I want to rein in the stereo difference here. It's not so left-right on us. Okay, so it's moving around. We have some interesting stuff. With a high decay, I'm going to go for the waveforms. Those are pretty nice. And we have a blend. And we can control the decay. So let's start automating a few things so you can kind of see it in action, because these are basically it. After this, we can choose to get rid of the high end. We could choose to clear some of the partials. We need to pick where we want to put this. And so I use this as the motion for the knob, but I will actually automate the knob also. That way I can select a region for different parts of the track. It makes it kind of cool. That way you can do like fade ins, fade outs with filter moves, and you get this motion like baked in on top. So I'm going to go to browse parameters. I am going to go to frequency, automate that. I'm also just going to bring the resonance up here while I'm here. I'm probably going to want it up. I'm going to leave this open because I also want to automate the decay. And the model, we will move with a modulation. We might automate it later. So I'm going to call it good there. So we'll just automate the decay in the frequency. We'll come in here, and the pattern itself is up here. So I'm not going to worry about it being up there, but just know those go together. In fact, we can group them. So pad 1's right there. This is like version 1. Here's version 2. I automated a lot of stuff here. We have frequency. We have a shape, which we'll definitely do as well for ours. So here's pad 2. It's these ones. And let's go ahead and pick a frequency range to start. And at this point, we can bring in the other stuff. Let me make sure my pad is off here so that we don't hear that. I just want to hear the one we're working on, not the one I finished with. Let's also get rid of a few things. So we're just hearing this. And I like to pick a shape, kind of like a sequencer, but these are like really changeable down the line, like workflow wise. So I tend to find these better. Let's find a shape that we kind of like for just this first bit. Oh, you know what? I did too many of these. Let's make it that long. Something like that. Maybe we have a jump at the end. I don't know. That could be kind of an interesting sound. We'll run with that, right? It's something we can change later on. We got lots of options. Now the decay, we kind of want this driving pretty hard, but maybe for a brief moment, we want it to not be so... Maybe for a brief moment, we don't want it to be so big. So like right here, maybe we just create a hole, right? Maybe we have it come up. And we could make these pockets where it's gone. Like that. You know, these little sparkles, you could toss it. You can choose to do this any way you want. This is one, I mean, I'm just slapping down stuff as fast as I can go. You'll find yourself sitting here forever debating what sequence is the best, how much sustain should you have in your sound, all these different things to make it sound sort of as good as possible for what you're trying to do. You know, modulation depths are one of those things you sit forever looking at. Let's move around this control here. Now, first, before you just attach something and make it move, I recommend you just grab it and slowly move it. And just get a vibe for what this can do before you just do that. I tend to just hook stuff up and away I go. And it's really worth it because you can select different modes and just try stuff out real slow like. And lets you consider things a little easier, I think. So let's try it out. So, okay, I like this one. I mean, I already know I like it from previous examples, but we could try out some others. I think piano is a good contender for this. I don't think the detune oscillators will work well, or the noise, or the voice. The metal could be a good one, just from experience with this. But I think this is going to be our best bet for like clear, kind of cool, glitchy stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. I'm going to grab another sequencer. This one, I'm just going to drag to some pattern. I'm going to give it a stronger shape. And I'm going to do something like that. Just very random. I'm going to give it more of a brick shape. I'm going to slow it down, actually, a little bit. I find this tends to work out pretty good. And we will go over and we want to move on the transform option. I don't want to touch the model because it's just going to lead to all these models that I don't really like for this particular thing. And we're going to go, what is this, sequencer 2. So we'll go ahead and give this a little bit of a move. See how that sounds. We'll put it in the middle so we can go up and down. So right here, it is a little soft. It's hard to tell with without everything else in there. But let's bring up the drive some just a bit. If we really push it, if you want. I find right there's a good amount of drive though. Damping, we're fine high frequency wise. I might reduce some of the high partials this way and get rid of some of the very low stuff. Just to make, you know, leave the really low stuff out. Usually it's not worth having. When the cutoff, if you're going to use a low pass with a really low cutoff, that resonance, when this stuff gets shifted down here, it's going to not be so great. Okay, so while we're doing this, some cool things you can do in addition to this. Any shape control is almost always awesome to try and automate. Just pick one. Because this is sort of responsible for like the craziness, this could be kind of a cool one to automate. So let's go ahead. And now I don't want to automate much past there, I don't think. I don't know. Maybe it'll be cool. We'll try it out. So we're going to go to Browse Parameters. We're going to grab that shape, automate it, and we'll close that. And we'll take a look at this here. By the way, I have it big, but you can make it small. It can get enormous, by the way. 200% is huge. We can make it a bit smaller so we can see this right now, though. And that's the cog up at the top. We'll come over here. We'll grab a shape, and we'll just have it do something. This one will go over 2 patterns. You might think in phrases. Right now, I'm doing things sort of just in groups of patterns. But you might look at, oh, you know, how's this phrase? How's that phrase? And actually phrase it to your music. But for now, I'm just sort of just doing interesting things. Each chord gets its own thing. Reality, I might want some sort of a progression all the way to the end of this. Let's take a look. You see it changing. We might want to shift this up some. Now, it would be interesting to sort of just mix the two of these together, or on the decay to have some natural small amount of movement as the decay moves around. So what we can do, let me make this big again, is come in here and just add a touch of it so that as it moves, it'll have this variation. And on this one, maybe we go the other way. Who knows? Let's see. Let's bring in more elements. So there you go. That is our final result. That originally it sounded like this. Now maybe you liked some of that. Remember, you got to wet dry. You can move it in according to your taste. Another thing you could consider automating to create that blend, which is honestly when music really gets kind of cool, is when it just sort of morphs and changes before your eyes. Here's what our original sounded like. So this one I took a lot more time picking out exactly each parameter, but all the ideas were pretty much the same. So that one's a little more reined in, a little more tame. I think it fits a little bit better, but you can see taking the time to pick things is important if you want like a really good result. But you've seen the techniques and the ideas I used to get to something like this. Honestly, all that's left on this is to just curate it, pick the exact curves you want, get the rhythm to work well with everything that's going on, that kind of a thing. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, let me know. What'd you think down in the comments? Do you have any other techniques you would use to make this even better? We have resellers for Polyverse down below, so check that out. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos, and have a blessed day.